The chamber of high consensus was not designed for silence, yet silence was the only occupant that held any authority within its obsidian walls. The vast, vaulted ceiling, ribbed with the skeletal remains of leviathans harvested from the gas giants of the outer rim, usually hummed with the harmonious resonance of the Ethelgardian choir, a telepathic and sonic weaving of 1,000 minds engaged in diplomatic discourse. Now the choir was shattered, reduced to a discordant murmur of fear that skittered across the floor like dry leaves before a storm. High Justicar Valen stood at the apex of the central dais, his four slender, chitinous arms folded tightly against his ceremonial robes, the iridescence of his carapace dulling to a shade of mournful gray. Before him, the great holographic sphere of the Dominion, usually a brilliant tapestry of trade routes and colonized worlds, was scarred with jagged crimson tears. The hollow scourge was no longer a myth whispered by fringe explorers. It was a necrotic reality, a creeping nothingness that had already swallowed the three outermost systems, leaving behind neither debris nor dust, only a terrifying, absolute absence. The silence in the chamber was the heavy, suffocating breath of a civilization realizing its own expiration date was fast approaching. Valen looked out over the assembled representatives, the aquatic Hydari in their suspended fluid tanks, the lithid craglords sitting like boulders of granite, and his own people, the avian insectoid Ethelgard, and saw the same reflection in every eye, the desperate, pathetic hope that the ancient beacons had worked. They had screamed into the void, calling for the progenitors, the Golden Fleet, the mythical guardians who had seeded the galaxy with life eons ago. They expected salvation to arrive in vessels of white light and geometric perfection. They waited for angels. The long-range sensors have confirmed a transition event, General Korth rumbled, his voice grinding like tectonic plates. Korth was a craglord, a being of immense density and minimal patience, his rocky hide scarred by centuries of border skirmishes that now seemed like children's games compared to the encroaching dark. He did not look at Valen. He stared at the tactical display, where a single blinking icon had appeared at the edge of the system's gravity well. It is not the Golden Fleet. The energetic signature is wrong. It is dirty, unrefined. It bleeds radiation like an open wound. If this is our salvation, it is already dying. Valen shifted his weight, his talons clicking softly on the obsidian. He felt the ripple of unease pass through the chamber, a psychic shiver that tasted of bile. The expectation of the progenitors had been a religious fervor. The reality of the sensor data was a blasphemy. Signature was not the harmonic hum of zero-point energy or the clean song of light sails. It was a roar. It was the sound of violent combustion, of atoms being smashed together with brute force, of metal groaning under stresses that defied architectural sanity. "Is it the Scourge?" Valen asked, his voice trembling despite his discipline. "Is it a vanguard of the Hollow?" Korth shook his head, a slow, grinding motion that showered dust from his shoulder joints. "No, the Scourge does not emit. It consumes. This object is broadcasting. It is broadcasting on frequencies so broad and chaotic they are overwhelming our translation matrix. It screams across the spectrum. Thermal, radio, gravitational, it is a beast." The holographic sphere shifted, zooming in on the anomaly. The gathered council gasped, a collective intake of breath that sucked the air from the room. The vessel that had torn its way through the fabric of subspace was not a ship in any conventional sense recognized by the refined aesthetics of the Galactic Council. It was a monstrosity of industrial brutality. It resembled a floating mountain of scarred, matte black composite, asymmetrical and ugly, bristling with protrusions that looked less like sensors and more like spines. There were no sleek curves, no elegant rings of propulsion. Instead, massive, fiery engines dominated the rear third of the structure, vomiting plumes of ionized plasma that stretched for hundreds of kilometers behind it. The hull was pockmarked with the impact craters of micrometeors and the burns of laser fire, patched with plates of different colors and textures, giving it the appearance of something that had been broken and remade 1,000 times. It looked like a flying refinery, a mobile fortress built by a species that had never known peace, only survival. Across the flank of the vessel, painted in stark, unapologetic white letters that seemed to gleam with a predatory luminescence, were symbols the translation matrix struggled to parse before finally spitting out a phonetic approximation. UNSC OZYMANDIAS. "It is huge," whispered the Hydari ambassador, her voice bubbling through the translation. Speakers, "It possesses the mass of a small moon. Its gravitational displacement alone is causing tidal warnings on the orbital habitats. Who builds such a thing? It is an affront to physics." Valen watched the telemetry. The ship was not slowing down. It was decelerating, yes, but with a violence that suggested its crew cared little for inertia dampening. It was powering through the system, S-heliosphere, ignoring the established flight lanes, ignoring the diplomatic hails, driving straight toward the Council world with the unstoppable momentum of a falling hammer. "They are not answering the hails," Korth growled, his hand hovering over the planetary defense grid controls. "They are armed." Detectors show kinetic rail cannons of absurd caliber, missile silos, directed energy projection arrays that dwarf our capital ships. This is not a rescue vessel, High Justicar. This is a dreadnought, a world killer. We called for help and the void sent us a predator. Valen felt the fear rise in his throat, choking him. The irony was bitter. They were being erased by the Scourge, and now perhaps they would be finished off by this barbarian Leviathan. "Hold fire," Valen commanded, though his authority felt thin. "If they wanted to destroy us, they could have launched kinetic ordnance from outside the system. They are coming close. They want something." "They want a scavenge," Korth argued, his stone fist clenching. "They see a dying empire and they have come to pick the bones before the Scourge arrives. Look at that ship. That is the ship of scavengers, of pirates. It is built from scrap." "Or," Valen said softly, watching the monstrous engines burn with the fury of a trapped star, "it is built by something that expects to be hit. Open a wideband frequency. Audio only if video fails. I want to hear them." The static that washed over the council chamber was not the gentle white noise of interference. It was a cacophony of thunder. Behind the static, there were voices, harsh, clipped, shouting orders in a guttural language that sounded like stones grinding in a mixer. And then, a master signal cut through the chaos, overriding the council's audio systems with a terrifying authority. The voice that spoke was synthetic, processed to remove inflection, yet it carried an underlying weight, a density of purpose that made Valen's feathers flatten against his neck. "This is High Admiral Halloway of the United Nations Space Command vessel Ozymandias," the voice boomed, vibrating the very crystals of the chandelier. "We received a distress beacon code-named Sanctuary. Verify status of threats. We are tracking a Class Omega entropic event on your perimeter. Response time was delayed due to subspace shearing. Acknowledge." There was no greeting, no diplomatic pleasantries. No, we come in peace. It was a demand for data. It was the voice of a mechanic asking what was wrong with an engine, but the engine was a civilization and the mechanic sounded like he was holding a sledgehammer. Valen stepped forward, activating his microphone. "This is High Justicar Valen of the Ethel Guardian Dominion. We acknowledge. We are under assault by the Hollow Scourge. Our fleets are broken. We requested the Golden Fleet. Who are you?" There was a pause on the line, filled with the deep, rhythmic thrumming of the alien ship's reactor, a sound like a heartbeat the size of a city. "The Golden Fleet is dust," the voice replied, devoid of sympathy. "They died 10,000 years ago. We heard their ghosts relaying your signal. We are Terra, we are humanity, and we are intercepting the hostility." The screen shifted again. The Ozymandias was rotating. The massive kinetic cannons that Korth had identified were not aiming at the planet. They were aiming away out toward the dark tier in space where the Scourge was advancing. But the movement was aggressive, sudden. "You are one ship," Korth barked into the comms, unable to contain his disdain. "The Scourge is a legion. It is a force of nature. You bring a single vessel of scrap metal to fight a tide of entropy? You are insane. You will be consumed." The laugh that came back over the speakers was dry, devoid of humor, and terrifyingly cold. "One ship," Halloway repeated. "You think this is a ship? This isn't a ship, General. This is a siege engine, and we didn't come to fight a tide. We came to break it, clear the orbital plane. We are initiating the Hammerfall Protocol. If you stay in our wake, you will burn." The transmission cut. Valen watched in horror as the Ozymandias vented a cloud of superheated gas, a deliberate expulsion of waste heat that blinded the sensors for a moment. When the image cleared, the human vessel was accelerating toward the Scourge. It did not flank. It did not seek cover. It charged. It was a suicide run. "They are mad," the Haidari ambassador bubbled, her tentacles recoiling in distress. "They are a primitive, suicidal species. They have misunderstood the nadir. E of the enemy. The Scourge cannot be shot. It absorbs energy. Any laser, any plasma we fire feeds it. They are flying a buffet directly into the mouth of the beast." Korth watched, his rocky brow furrowed. "Let them die," he grunted. "Perhaps their death will buy us a few cycles to evacuate the archives." But Valen could not look away. There was something in the chaotic design of the human ship, something in the way it moved, not with grace but with heavy, unstoppable purpose, that held him. It moved like a creature that had been hurt before, a creature that had learned that the only way to survive pain was to inflict more of it upon the universe. "Look," Valen whispered. "They are not charging the Scourge's fleet. They are charging the sun." The Council turned as one to the solar telemetry. The Ozymandias had bypassed the interception vectors of the Scourge's vanguard and was diving deep into the gravity well of the system's star. The heat shields on the human ship began to glow cherry red, then blinding white. The radiation alarms in the Council chamber screamed. "They are going to impact the star?" Korth asked, confused. "Are they trying to trigger a supernova? They will kill us all." "No," Vaylin said, his eyes widening as he read the new sensor data flowing from the human ship. "They are deploying scoops, magnetic scoops. They are not impacting. They are harvesting." The Ozymandias, enduring temperatures that would have melted the hull of an Ethelgardian cruiser in seconds, dipped into the upper photosphere of the star. The massive spines on its hull lit up with blinding blue lightning. It was sucking plasma directly from the star's surface, channeling the raw fury of nuclear fusion into its belly. The ship shuddered visibly on the screen, groaning under the intake. It was drinking fire. "Energy levels on the Terran vessel are rising," the computer announced, its voice synthesized panic. 4,000%, 6,000. They are exceeding theoretical capacitance limits. The ship should be vaporized. The hull integrity is holding. They are becoming a stellar bomb. The Scourge, a creeping shadow of nanite clouds and void ships that blotted out the stars, seemed to hesitate. The entity, though hive-minded and voracious, sensed the spike in energy. It was a predator, and it had just realized that the prey had pulled a grenade pin. The Ozymandias pulled up from the sun, trailing a ribbon of solar fire like a whip. It turned its ugly, scarred prow toward the Scourge. The massive cannons along its flank did not fire shells. They opened up, revealing complex, spinning magnetic coils. "Communication from the Terran vessel," the comms officer shouted. "Text only, it reads, 'Get behind us.'" Vaylin didn't hesitate. "All orbital defenses align behind the Terran ship, shift shielding to rear quadrants. Do it now." The Ethelgardian fleet, battered and broken, limped into the shadow of the human Leviathan. And then the Ozymandias roared. It did not fire a beam. It did not launch a missile. It exhaled. It released the stored solar plasma in a focused, coherent cone of destruction, propelled by magnetic fields so strong they warped the light of the stars behind them. It was a directed solar flare, a man-made coronal mass ejection. The cone of white fire slammed into the Scourge. The Scourge, which fed on lasers and standard plasma bolts, could not feed on this. This was not weaponized energy. This was the raw stuff of creation, heavy with baryons, screaming with radiation, thick and physical. It was too much, too fast. The void ships of the Scourge didn't explode, they evaporated. The nanite clouds were stripped of their electrons, turning into harmless ionized dust. The beam lasted for 6 endless seconds, painting the system in a harsh, unforgiving light that revealed every crack in the Council chamber walls. When it faded, the Ozymandias drifted, its hull glowing dull red, venting steam and coolant into the vacuum. A swath of the enemy fleet, thousands of kilometers wide, was simply gone. Silence returned to the chamber, but it was different now. It was the silence of awe. Korth sank into his chair, a dusting of pebbles falling from his knees. "They weaponized a star," he murmured. "They used our own sun as ammunition. That is not warfare. That is industrial engineering applied to murder." Vaylin stared at the drifting human ship. It looked even uglier now, scorch marks striping its already battered hull. It looked magnificent. "Hail them," Vaylin said. "I want to speak to High Admiral Holloway. I want to thank him." The screen flickered, and for the first time, visual feed was established. The bridge of the Ozymandias was not the pristine, white command center of the Ethelgard. It was a cave of dark metal, illuminated by the orange glow of tactical displays and the sparks of repairing welders. Wires hung from the ceiling like vines. The crew did not wear ceremonial robes. They wore heavy pressurized suits that looked scratched and used. And in the center, strapped into a chair that looked more like an ejection seat than a command throne, was Holloway. He was a human of advanced years, his face a roadmap of scars and deep lines, his hair cropped short and gray. He looked exhausted. He looked like a man who had been fighting for so long he had forgotten what peace felt like. Beside him stood a soldier in power armor so bulky it looked like a walking tank, holding a weapon that could likely puncture a hull. Holloway unbuckled his restraints and leaned forward, peering into the camera. His eyes were not the eyes of a savior. They were the eyes of a survivor. "Status," he barked, not to Vaylin, but to someone off-screen. "Venting primary coils, hull integrity at 40%. We lost Sector 7, a voice replied in the background. Holloway grunted, then looked at Vaylin. "You're welcome," he said, his voice raspy. "But don't start celebrating. That was just the scout wave. The main body of the Scourge is still 3 light years out, and we blew our main capacitor. We're going to need repairs, and we're going to need them fast." "I assume your dockyards are functional." Vaylin nodded, his beak clicking. We will give you whatever you need. Our resources are yours, but High Admiral, I must ask, why come to this place? Why risk your vessel for a species you do not know? Holloway rubbed his eyes, a gesture of profound human fatigue that transcended species barriers. Because, he said, leaning back, we know what the Scourge is. We fought it in our own sector 200 years ago. We lost Earth. We lost our colonies. We lost everything but the ships we could build from the ruins. We are not a rescue fleet, High Justicar. We are a hunting party. We have been chasing that thing across the dark for generations. We don't save you because we are kind. We save you because we need your guns, we need your metal, and we need your witness. Because when we finally kill that thing, we want someone to be alive to see it. The revelation hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The Ethelgard had thought the humans were a primitive, aggressive upstart. They were wrong. The humans were the veterans of a war the Ethelgard hadn't even known was being fought. They were the walking dead, the remnants of a tragedy so vast it had turned an entire species into a weapon. You lost your homeworld? Vaylin asked softly. We turned it into a trap, Holloway corrected, a grim smile touching his lips. It didn't work. So now we build better traps. Prepare your docking clamps. We are coming in. And tell your Rockman General to stop targeting my engines. If he shoots, the antimatter containment fails and we all turn into stardust. Holloway out. The screen went black. Act 2 began not with fanfare, but with the grinding of metal. The Ozymandias docked with the precision of a surgeon, though its mass caused the orbital station to groan in protest. The cultural exchange that followed was a collision of philosophies. The Ethelgard valued aesthetics, harmony, and protocol. The humans valued redundancy, durability, and brutally efficient logistics. When Vaylin led a delegation to board the human ship, they were assaulted by the sensory overload of human engineering. The air smelled of ozone, recycled sweat, and machine oil. The gravity was set slightly higher than standard, giving every movement a sense of effort. The corridors were narrow, lined with pipes and conduits that pulsed with energy. It was claustrophobic, functional, and terrifying. Vaylin met with Holloway in what passed for a conference room, a metal box with a bolted-down table and magnetic maps plastered to the walls. Holloway was drinking a dark, steaming liquid from a battered mug. Coffee, he offered, seeing Vaylin stare. Toxic to your biology probably, keeps the brain firing. Vaylin declined with a polite bow. Your vessel, it is unlike anything in the archives, Vaylin began. It seems built to endure catastrophe rather than avoid it. Holloway nodded. That's the doctrine. You guys build ships to glide through the universe. We build ships to crash through it. The Ozymandias is modular. If the front gets blown off, the back keeps fighting. If the bridge is hit, command transfers to engineering. We don't assume we'll win. We assume we'll get hurt, and we plan on fighting while bleeding. This philosophy terrified and fascinated the Ethelgard. In their culture, a damaged ship was a failure of command. To the humans, a damaged ship was just Monday. The deeper the Ethelgard explored the human vessel, the more they realized the depth of their underestimation. They found the libraries, not digital crystals, but physical books, heavy and fragile, preserved in vacuum-sealed vaults. Why keep physical data? The Hydari ambassador asked Holloway's science officer, a woman named Dr. Eris who wore a prosthetic eye that whirred softly. Because digital signal. S can be jammed, Eris replied, touching the spine of an old terrestrial encyclopedia. Because the Scourge eats code. It corrupts networks, but it can't hack paper. If we lose the computers, we can still teach the next generation how to build a reactor. We carry our history in our hands, not just in the cloud. The friction between the species came to a head when Korth demanded access to the human weapon schematics. We must duplicate your solar scoops, Korth insisted, his voice booming in the small human mess hall. If we equip our fleet, we can stand with you. Holloway slammed his mug down. You can't equip your fleet. Your ships are art projects. They're made of spun glass and force fields. You try to mount a magnetic induction scoop on a hull that thin, you'll tear the ship in half. You want to help. You don't need our guns, you need to be our shield. Korth bristled, gravel grinding. You asked the Crag Lords to be meat shields for your scavengers. I ask you to do what you are good at, Holloway said, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm. Your ships have projected barriers with 99% efficiency. Mine have armor. I can take a hit, but I can't take 1,000. You can stop the rain. I can bring the thunder. We integrate. We don't duplicate. It was a difficult pill to swallow. The Ethelgard, the Crag Lords, the Hydari, they were ancient, proud races. To be told by these scarred, homeless apes that their technology was too fragile was an insult. But the logic was undeniable. The humans had survived the Scourge. They were the experts in apocalypse. Reluctantly, the alliance was formed. The Ethelgardian engineers worked alongside human mechanics, sparking a cultural revolution in the process. The aliens watched in horror as humans fixed delicate quantum stabilizers with percussive maintenance, hitting it with a wrench and bypass wires. "It works," a human grease monkey shrugged when a horrified Ethel Guardian pointed out the safety violation. "It's ugly, but it holds." This became the mantra of the Alliance. It's ugly, but it holds. As the main body of the Scourge approached, the tension in the system became a physical weight. The Scourge was not just a fleet, it was a darkening of the stars. It arrived like a storm front, a wall of silence that dampened sensors and chilled the soul. The Ozymandias moved to the center of the formation, surrounded by the glittering, elegant ships of the Dominion. It looked like a barbarian warlord surrounded by courtiers. But when the battle joined, the courtiers realized the warlord was the only thing keeping them alive. The battle was a chaotic, swirling melee. The Scourge attacked with swarms of drone ships that acted like a fluid, flowing around shields and seeking weak points. The Ethel Guardian shields flared, holding back the tide, but the strain was immense. "Left flank failing," Korth shouted over the shared tactical net. "We are being overwhelmed." "Hold the line," Holloway's voice cut through. "Wait for the solution." "What solution?" Korth screamed. "Physics," Holloway replied. The Ozymandias did not fire its main cannon. Instead, it deployed a series of buoys, massive, ugly iron spheres, into the center of the Scourge swarm. "Are those mines?" Valen asked. "No," Holloway said. "Gravity anchors." The humans activated the device. The buoys didn't explode, they imploded. They generated momentary artificial singularities. The effect was catastrophic for the Scourge. The tight formation of the enemy swarm, which relied on precise coordination, was thrown into chaos as their ships were dragged toward the crushing points of gravity. They collided, shattered, and spun out of control. It was a massacre of geometry. The humans had turned the vacuum itself into a weapon. "Now," Holloway ordered, "all ships fire into the gravity wells." The Dominion fleet unleashed everything they had into the swirling knots of enemy ships. The wreckage piled up, creating physical barriers of debris that the Scourge could not navigate. The humans had created terrain in space. They had turned a void battle into a trench war, a grinding, brutal slog that favored the heavy armor and kinetic weaponry of the Ozymandias. But the Scourge had a mind, and it adapted. A massive mothership, a dreadnought of silence larger than the Ozymandias, broke through the debris field. It targeted the human ship, firing a beam of pure entropy, a purple light that aged whatever it touched. The Ozymandias took the hit. Armor plates turned to dust. Structural beams rusted in seconds. The ship groaned, a sound transmitted through the hull that sounded like a dying wail. "We are losing structural integrity," Dr. Aris screamed. "The keel is snapping." On the bridge of the Ethelgard flagship, Valen watched the human ship dying. He saw the humans scrambling not to flee, but to shore up the breach, to fight to the last breath. And he realized something profound. The humans were not fighting for survie anymore. They were fighting for spite. They were fighting to prove that the universe could kill them, but it couldn't break them. "General Korth," Valen said, his voice steady, "the human ship is the anchor. If it falls, the gravity wells collapse and the Scourge overruns us. We must protect it." Korth looked at the screen. The Craglord, who had despised the ugly human ship, stood up. "Helm," he rumbled, "ramming speed." The Craglord flagship, a massive block of granite and shielding, accelerated. It did not fire. It flew directly into the path of the entropy beam. The beam struck the Craglord ship, aging the stone, turning the shields to static, but the ship held. It was a rock. Rocks do not die easily. Korth's ship absorbed the blow, shielding the Ozymandias. "Human," Korth's voice came over the comms, strained but triumphant. "We are shifting our stance. We are the shield. You are the hammer. Strike now." Holloway didn't waste the moment. "All power to the main railguns. Load the relativistic slugs. Target the mothership's core." The Ozymandias, protected by the dying alien ship, fired. Two projectiles, made of solid tungsten and accelerated to a fraction of the speed of light, exited the barrels. The impact was silent in the void, but the result was blinding. The Scourge mothership didn't just break, it shattered. The kinetic energy transfer liquefied its internal structure. The command node was vaporized. The Scourge, headless and confused, began to scatter. The victory was messy, brutal, and costly, but it was a victory. In the aftermath, the mood was somber. The Craglord flagship was a wreck, floating dead in space. Korth had survived, barely pulled from the wreckage by a human search and rescue team that had cut through the hull with plasma torches. The reunion in the council chamber was different this time. The fear was gone. In its place was a deep, respectful silence. The humans stood among the aliens not as scavengers, but as equals. The Ozymandias hung in orbit, a broken ruin, leaking atmosphere, held together by Ethelgardian force-stapes and human stubbornness. Valen stood before Holloway. "You saved us," Valen said, "at great cost." Holloway shrugged, his arm in a sling. "That's the job, but we aren't done. The Scourge will come back. They always do." "Then we will be ready," Korth grunted, his rocky skin cracked and bandaged. "We will build uglier ships." A ripple of amusement went through the room, the first laugh in an age. But the story did not end with a handshake. Holloway's face grew serious. "There is one more thing," he said. "The signal we tracked, the one that brought us here, it wasn't just your distress beacon. We found something else, buried in the noise of the Scourge's transmission." He nodded to Dr. Aris, who activated the hologram. It displayed a waveform, complex, structured, and ancient. "This is a carrier wave," Aris explained. "It's coming from the galactic core. It's coming from the Scourge's origin point." "Is it a command signal?" Valen asked fearfully. "Is it their masters?" "No," Holloway said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "We decoded it. It's a warning. It's not from the Scourge, it's from the Golden Fleet." The council erupted in gasps. "They are alive," Valen cried. "No," Holloway said. "They are definitely dead, but they left a message. The Scourge isn't an invader, it's a terrified animal. It's running. The Golden Fleet didn't die fighting the Scourge. They died fighting what the Scourge is running from." The hologram shifted, showing a map of the galaxy. A large section of the core was dark, not empty, but blocked. "There is something waking up in the center," Holloway said. "Something that eats civilizations not for fuel, but for silence. The Scourge is trying to consume matter to build a wall, a barrier against the dark. They are doing it wrong. They are destroying the galaxy to save it." The silence in the chamber was absolute. The victory against the Scourge suddenly felt small, a skirmish in the shadow of a much larger doom. "So," Valen whispered, "we are trapped between a devourer and a destroyer." Holloway stood up, and for the first time he looked like the leader of a species that had conquered its own extinction. He looked at the aliens, the fragile, the strong, the wise. "No," he said, "we are not trapped, we are gathered. The Golden Fleet failed because they were perfect. They were rigid, they broke, but look at us. We are broken things. We are stitched together with scar tissue and refuse. We are ugly, and that makes us tough." He pointed to the star map to the dark zone. "The Scourge is running. The Golden Fleet is dead. That leaves us. The Ozymandias isn't going back to Earth. We're going to the core. We're going to find out what's in the dark, and we're going to punch it in the teeth. Who's coming with us?" Valen looked at Korth. Korth looked at the Haidari. They looked at their broken fleets, their scarred worlds. They lew. Ket at the humans, these mad, dangerous, beautiful monsters who turned suns into guns and defeat into fuel. Valen stepped forward, extending a talon. "The Dominion stands with Terra," he said. "We will bring the light." "And we," Korth growled, smashing his fist into his palm, "will bring the rocks." Holloway smiled, a genuine predatory grin. "Good," he said. "Load up. We leave at dawn." The camera pulled back, through the obsidian roof of the council chamber, up into the orbit where the Ozymandias floated, a jagged shard of black metal against the stars. It was ugly. It was dangerous. And it was the only hope the galaxy had left. As the alien fleets began to form up on its wing, a new signal began to broadcast, not a distress call, but a challenge, screaming into the void in every language known to sentient life, a promise of violence and defiance that would shake the pillars of creation. The humans had arrived, and the quiet universe would never be silent again. The transition to Act 3 was not marked by a cut to black, but by the slow, deliberate pan across the new fleet. It was a fleet of chimeras. Ethelgardian cruisers bolted with human armor plating, Craglord barges fitted with delicate Haidari sensor arrays. It was a visual representation of the new philosophy, survival through synthesis. The Alliance of the Scarred, they called themselves. As they moved toward the galactic core, the narrative deepened into the philosophical implications of this union. Valen found himself spending more time on the Ozymandias. He found a strange comfort in the human noise. He spoke often with Holloway late into the ship's night cycle. "You humans speak of hope as if it is a strategy," Valen mused one evening, watching the slipspace tunnel swirl outside the viewport. "In my culture, hope is considered a logical fallacy. It blinds one to the probability of failure." Holloway laughed, a sound that was less rasping now, more settled. "Hope isn't a strategy, Valen, it's fuel. Logic tells you when to quit. Logic says the odds are zero, stop wasting energy. Hope is the thing that ignores the math. It's the thing that says, I don't care if I can't win, I'm going to make sure you lose. That's why we survived. We are too stubborn to die when the math says we should." This concept, weaponized stubbornness, began to permeate the Ethelgardian psyche. They started to take risks. They started to improvise. The Hydari, usually timid observers, began to develop aggressive cyber warfare suites, using their fluid minds to infiltrate the Scourge's hive network. They found that the Scourge was not a monolith, it was terrified. The voices of the Scourge were screaming, "The silence comes, the silence comes." The climax of the journey was the arrival at the event horizon of the core. Here, the stars were old, red giants and white dwarfs, clustered so thickly the sky was a blinding sheet of light. And in the center, a void, not a black hole, but a region of space where physics had simply stopped working. The Great Filter, Holloway called it. The fleet was met not by the Scourge, but by the remnants of it. Shattered husks of Scourge world ships floated in the drift. Something had torn them apart, not with weapons, but with erasure. Sections of the ships were simply missing, cut away as if by a cosmic editor. "Sensor readings are impossible," Dr. Aris reported, her voice tight. "I'm reading negative mass. I'm reading time dilation that makes no sense. It's like reality is thinning here." And then the entity emerged. It was not a ship, it was a shadow. A geometric shadow, a perfect tetrahedron the size of a planetary system, blacker than black, absorbing the light of the cluster. It did not communicate, it simply was, and as it moved, the stars behind it winked out. It was unmaking the universe. This was the threat the Golden Fleet had feared. This was the threat the Scourge ran from, the entropy engine. "It's a machine," Korth realized, his voice trembling for the first time. "It is a machine that harvests existence." "How do we fight that?" Valen whispered. "It is a god of death." Holloway stood on the bridge looking at the screen. He didn't look afraid, he looked angry. "It's not a god," he said. "It's a machine, and machines can be broken." He turned to the comms. "All ships, the plan stands. We aren't going to shoot it. You can't shoot a shadow. We are going to choke it." The plan was madness, pure, distilled human madness. The Ozymandias and the Allied fleet were carrying a payload they had constructed during the voyage, a hyperdensity collapse bomb. It was a device made of Craglord density matter, Ethel Guardian containment fields, and human antimatter triggers. It was designed to create a momentary Big Bang, a pulse of creation so violent it would invert the local entropy. They were going to force-feed the universe back into the thing that was eating it. But it had to be delivered inside. "I'm taking the Ozymandias in," Holloway announced. "No," Valen said, stepping forward on the bridge. "You are the strategist. You cannot be the sacrifice." "It's my ship," Holloway said. "It's my trigger." "It is our fleet," Korth said, appearing on the screen. "And we are Craglords. We do not let the soft skins carry the heavy burdens." Korth's flagship, patched and ugly, moved alongside the Ozymandias. "We will tow the payload. You will clear the path." "And we," the Hydari voice chimed in, "will mask the signature. The entity will not see the bomb until it is too late." For the first time in galactic history, a unified fleet of disparate species executed a maneuver of perfect synchronization. The Ethel Guardian cruisers danced forward, firing dazzling patterns of light to distract the entity's sensors. The Hydari flooded the spectrum with noise. The humans unleashed a barrage of kinetic slugs, creating a corridor of solid metal. And down the center, Korth's ship, towing the massive bomb, charged into the dark. The entity reacted. Tendrils of non-existence lashed out. Ethel Guardian ships vanished, erased from history. Human frigates were twisted into scrap, but the line held. It's ugly, but it holds. Korth's ship breached the event horizon of the tetrahedron. "Detonating," Korth's voice came, calm and grinding. "For the stone, for the sky, for the quiet." The explosion was silent, but the light was seen across half the galaxy. A sphere of pure white creation expanded from the center of the dark. It collided with the entropy shadow. Matter met antimatter. Existence met non-existence. The universe screamed. When the light faded, the tetrahedron was shattered. Cracks of blinding blue light spiderwebbed across its surface. It was leaking reality. It was dying. The threat was not gone, but it was broken. It would take eons to repair. The Alliance had bought the future. But Korth was gone. The final scene took place on the bridge of the Ozymandias. The fleet was limping home. They were fewer now, battered, but they were alive. Valen stood by the viewport, looking at the scar in space where the victory had been won. "He is gone," Valen said. "He's part of the Foundation now," Holloway said, staring into the dark. "That's how we build, on the bones of the brave." Valen looked at the human. "You said you were a dangerous ship. You were right. You are dangerous to everything that hates life." Holloway turned. The exhaustion was deep in his bones, but his eyes were clear. "We're going to need a new name for the Alliance," he said. "The Dominion is gone. The UN is gone. We are something else now." Valen spread his wings, a gesture of encompassing. "We are the keepers," he said, "the keepers of the flame." "A bit dramatic," Holloway smirked, "but I like it." The ship turned, engines flaring, not the clean blue of the Ethelgard, nor the dirty red of the humans, but a brilliant purple fusion of both. They set a course not for home, but for the next distress signal, because the universe was dark and full of terrors. But now the terrors had something to fear. The help had arrived, and it was not an angel. It was a human in a tank, an alien with a soul, and a ship that refused to die. And that was enough. The screen faded to black, leaving only the sound of the combined heartbeat of the crew, 3 hearts, 1 heart, no heart, beating in a rhythm of defiance that would echo until the last star went out.